let's talk about George's evolution on what he's revealed to us. And really it's strange because, long story short, he keeps kicking the can down the road on the big secret of what House Dayne is and what happened at Starfall. Maybe he doesn't know. Maybe he's trying to figure it out. But in the beginning, of course, very early in A Game of Thrones, when he was writing those first 13 chapters in the year 1991, he has Ashara Dayne and Arthur Dayne in there. Ashara, this mystery love character, this mystery past love character that Ned has. Arthur Dayne, her brother. Ned somehow seems to kill Arthur Dayne and bring the sword back to Starfall. And we don't really know anything else about House Dayne. Now keep in mind that as A Game of Thrones grew as a book, very little about Dorne is included in A Game of Thrones. In fact, even at this time, Robert's Rebellion includes Dorne, and Cersei mentions that perhaps Jon Snow's mother is some Dornish peasant that Ned raped in war. Of course, later Dorne is retconned out of Robert's Rebellion. Besides, the Dornish army coming out, but nothing in. There was no battle. There were no battles in Dorne. However, one of the more interesting things about A Game of Thrones is the appendix, and this is rarely brought up. But let me bring up the appendix of A Game of Thrones. Let's see. Let's make sure that I've got so many windows open that I'm probably going to get the wrong one. That is the wrong one. Let's try. Here it is. The appendix of A Game of Thrones is fascinating. Now, keep in mind that the appendix is put together pretty late. He's actually even well into Clash by the time the appendix is put together. But it's really fun looking through sort of the appendix because you're like, wow, just little things like a little tangent. Like if you look at House Lannister and you're like, Garyon and his bastard daughter Joy are mentioned in the Game of Thrones appendix. He had thought about Joy, this bastard daughter that has no role. I mean, she's briefly mentioned in A Feast for Crows, having no importance whatsoever. But it's amazing. But I love it because when you get to Dorne, it's fascinating. So, I mean, House Greyjoy, he has Aeron and Victarion and Euron as characters. Like, oh, really? This early? That's. But our boys in Dorne, they get done a little dirty, and it's pretty apparent that when George wrote A Game of Thrones, he did not know really what he was doing with the Dorne story. He does mention the fact that there's different succession here. That's the main thing. He talks about the Roynish and all of that, and then he gets into their succession, and then he gets into the family. Okay, so it's fascinating. He has Doran, Malario, his wife, the children, Arianne, Quentyn, Trystane. Siblings, Elia, Rain. I wonder if this typo is in the appendix or if this is a typo on the wiki. Aegon, his brother Prince Oberyn. No sand snakes mentioned in A Feast for Crows or A Clash of Kings. The sand snakes are first put in the appendix in a Storm of Swords. And of course, they don't appear until A Feast for Crows. So Hota gets mentioned in the A Game of Thrones appendix. He somehow knew Hota was going to be a major character. Maester Callio too. Now, keep in mind, none of the other houses we're not told the lords, heads of any other fucking houses in the story. But lo and behold, Edric motherfucking Dayne right here in the appendix of a Game of Thrones. He somehow thought Edric Dayne was going to be important and that he needed a shout out. Over now, let's not put too much into this. First of all, well, I'll take it on two paths. First, the let's not think too much of it. Maybe George had no idea what he was doing path, and maybe George was thinking a lot about this path. So let's talk about the let's pretend that George doesn't know what he's doing here. Okay. It's somewhat reasonable that House Dayne, which has been mentioned in a Game of Thrones, it's the only Dornish house that we've talked about, except for maybe Santigar. I mean, really, Aaron Santigar is mentioned. He could have put in, the Sir Simon Santigar, and if we're talking about the houses that are mentioned in Game of Thrones, and then maybe he was just putting lords of houses that were mentioned that were significant, but he really should have put Santigar if you were going to do that. But nonetheless, maybe you could say, okay, it's just a fluke. He didn't put Santigar in, but House Dayne was talked about enough that you got to throw in the Lord there, and he just picks a name out of his ass, Edric Dayne. He's not establishing that this is a boy. He's not establishing that it's Beric Dondarrion's squire. Obviously, it's pretty obvious that at this point George hadn't thought of Edric Dayne being his squire. I mean, there's no mention of Ned seeing anyone with starfall like colors or heraldry. In any of his chapters, he sends Beric Dondarrion out. Doesn't mention like, oh, and there's a boy with the fucking House Dayne, livery, sigils all over him. No, none of it's very clear that in a Game of Thrones, George had no idea that Ned Dayne was going to be Beric's squire. However, it may be that he just threw in the name, he picked it out, and just said that this was the Lord of Starfall, and that House Dayne is mentioned enough that I need to at least highlight him. That's the George wasn't thinking about it. But then there's the evidence that maybe George was thinking about it. If you think about Ned's children, Ned names a kid Rob, and he names a kid John. And who are Ned's best friends? Well, his best friend is Robert, and his other best friend is John. And he varied it a little, and obviously Rob is the name taken from A Song for Leah. You look at John's children, John Aaron's children. He named a kid Robert. That's clear. We're told specifically that's after Baratheon. We're actually never told that Rob double B is named after Baratheon. And then we look at Baratheon's children. Well, they're named by Lannisters, but his bastard is named Edric. And now keep in mind, Edric, you may say Edric Storm doesn't get a mention in a Game of Thrones, but he is mentioned very early in A Clash of Kings, which would have been written by the time this appendix is coming out. So the only Edrics this early in the story, there are some Edrics with a CK, but the only Edrics with a C at this point in the story are Edric Storm and Edric Dayne. Edric gets shortened to Ned. One could argue that Robert was naming a kid Edric to honor Ned, just as Ned named a child Rob to honor Robert, and another one John to honor John Aaron, and John Aaron names a kid Robert and in a nice little circle of honoring each other kind of thing. So if you're on the train of George was thinking about this shit, the whole Edric Dayne is named after Ned could be seen as a very early idea, right? Because Edric Storm is invented as a character very early in A Clash of Kings, before Game of Thrones is published or even finished. He's invented the character of Edric Storm. Edric Storm could be named after Ned, so maybe he's thinking that Edric is Ned, just as Eddard. It's just a version of Eddard and everything. So the point of that is that we're establishing early that House Dayne likes Ned, despite the fact that Ned is responsible for killing Arthur and, as the story goes, driving Ashara to suicide. But somehow they like Ned enough that they're naming a kid after him. Pretty nuts, right? I mean, Edric Dayne's dad, we don't know his name. We'll just call him Lord Dayne. Lord Dayne, Ned kills his brother, drives his sister to suicide, and then names his kid after Ned. Okay, well, where's the story? What's the story there? Well, we kind of don't know. We don't know. Like, we get this big mystery of what happened at Starfall, and maybe George planted some seeds here, but then Clash of Kings goes by, nothing significant in the Clash of Kings whatsoever with regards to this. But a Storm of Swords happens then. And we get the famous Edric Dayne conversation. Which I think, in my opinion, Ned Dayne is kind of shoved into this. I think he's shoved into the story illogically. Like, does it make sense? Does it make sense that Beric Dondarrion's squire would be the Lord of Starfall, and at no point the Lord of Starfall would have been pointed out to Ned, and it wouldn't have been made a big deal? This is the Lord of a major house. He wouldn't, he's not in finery at some point. Ned never notices him. He's not given a seat of any sort of honor during the hand's tourney. Nothing. A lord of a major house, really. We get Beric Dondarrion mentions right and fucking left, but no. Jason Mallister is mentioned, a bunch, but no mentions of Ned Dayne, the Lord of Starfall, and that somehow the Lord of Starfall is just going to go out on this mission to try to kill, to try to bring justice to Gregor. And there's just, and all of the times that people are mentioning that Beric Dondarrion is in the woods attacking people, and where is Beric, where is Lord Beric, and no one is like, oh yeah, he's also at the fucking Lord of Starfall. What? Like, what? Like, at no point up until A Storm of Swords, like, no person is like, man, this Beric Dondarrion's band is just, and him and that Thoros, they mentioned Thoros, they mentioned Beric. No one decides, like, no one's mentioning that the fucking Lord of Starfall is with them. Nobody. It's very clear that Ned is just shoved in there. For what reason? And when we actually read Ned's story, the unfortunate thing is there's not much there. It goes on for pages, and he says, oh yeah, John, like, we're not really given any new information. Like, oh, me and John were milk brothers. Well, we knew that if you're under the impression that, like, John was at the Tower of Joy or whatever, or if you're under the impression that John is Ashara Dayne's child, yeah, he would be at Starfall. Like, that all makes sense. It's not decisive, or it doesn't change anything. And he tells, oh yeah, and Ned and Ashara were in love, and it drove her to her suicide. Well, that's not new information. Like, we know all that from a Game of Thrones. Like, Cersei accuses Ned of this. And so it's odd, you know, it's very odd that like Ned is shoved into the story to remind us that Ashara Dayne is a thing. But then he doesn't actually reveal anything. You know, he kind of says, oh, Wyla is the mother. Well, we heard about Wyla from Robert. So it's not, there's nothing new except that like you're making Arya angry for a moment, and then she never thinks of, she promptly forgets about it and never thinks about it again. The other thing about Ned Dayne is, and his age, is it's quite sloppy when you really think about the whole story, because you start doing the math and you say, okay, well, if Ashara Dayne is of an age with Ned, and Arthur Dayne is older and is Rhaegar's oldest friend, that means he's got to be like friends with Rhaegar from like longer than John Connington, and he can't join the Kingsguard younger than, say, an age 17. And so how is he around Rhaegar? And then you start saying, but then the Lord of Starfall has to be older than that. And then you kind of say, okay, but then Illyri Dayne, who's betrothed to Beric, she's going to be in a certain age range. And you realize like the siblings have just this huge range, like 30-year range in age when you start thinking about it, you know, to try to have the story kind of make sense. And it's just, it's hastily put together is what I'm saying. when you start like examining the family tree of House Dayne and Edric and everything. But yeah, you don't get any new information here, which is too bad. Too bad. I mean, the only thing that happens is that Arya finds out all of the information that Catelyn knew in a Game of Thrones and does nothing with it. So then, now I want to talk about, so this mystery of Starfall is still just kind of going along. Now, Carmine sent me the blurb. The blurb. Because there's a few other things. So, A Storm of Swords comes out. And then we have this early blurb from 2002. This is 2002, this blurb for future books comes out, and it's remarkably accurate. But nonetheless, Sensicum skilled player, Game of Thrones, Arya skilled assassin, Bran a magician, shapeshifter, all men must die. Daenerys trains, this is the important part. Daenerys trains her growing dragons and learns from Barristan the secrets of her father, her brother Rhaegar, and other matters that will culminate at Starfell. A spelling error. But of course, this is information that relate, you know, we eventually do find this information like from Barristan, but it's kind of a big fucking disappointment, right? But nonetheless, George had this idea that somehow Daenerys' story relates to the Danes as well. And I mean, this came out in like 2002. And I wanted to compare this to, there's a So Spake Martin about this. Where did I put that? Oh no. Oh, here it is. Here we go. This is what I also think is kind of interesting, is that in 1999, this is right before Storm is published, someone asks him, I'll spare you the rest of my speculation about the date of Jon's birth, since the only real conclusion is that Catelyn seems a little thick when she thinks that Ned fathered Jon as he returned Dawn to Ashara Dayne. George said, he's in haws about Jon and Dany's ages. And then he says, as to your speculation about Catelyn and Ashara Dayne, sigh, needless to say, all will be revealed in good time. I'll give you this much, however. Ashara Dayne was not nailed to the floor at Starfall, as some fans who write me seem to assume. They have horses in Dorne too, and boats, though not many of their own. As a matter of fact, a tiny tidbit from a Storm of Swords. She was one of Elya's lady companions in King's Landing in the first few years after Elya's marriage to Rhaegar. The rest I'll save for the books. So he says that this is some sort of tidbit that he's given us that's going to be important. Now, it turns out it's not really very important. I don't think Ashara Dayne is mentioned in a storm like that. But when we do get to finally Barristan's reveal of what Ashara was doing and all of that Starfall stuff, you're like, oh my gosh, the blurb, what's going to happen? It's here. And Barristan says, oh yeah, she'd been a young maiden at court, one of Elya's companions. Though compared to Ashara Dayne, the Dornish princess was a kitchen drab. After all these years, Daenerys has the same eyes. He felt as if she was Ashara's daughter, but Ashara's daughter was stillborn. And she'd been mad with grief and maybe at being dishonored at Harrenhal. And she looked to Stark. And you're still just left with nothing. like how does this relate to Daenerys? Because you just said that it's not Daenerys because Daenerys' daughter, like Ashara Dayne's child was stillborn. Like, back in 99, I mean, keep in mind, Dance of Dragons is published in 2011. And he's talking about how there's going to be this tidbit from A Storm of Swords. And in the blurb from 2002, this was going to be a major plot point. This idea that she will learn secrets of her father, her brother Rhaegar, and other matters that will culminate at Starfell. So when I say like you get these elements that George has been really thinking that Starfall is going to be really important from the beginning. So important that he included Edric Dayne in the appendix. And then decides to shove him in illogically. Just shove in the dude. Just throw in a fucking boy lord in the fucking middle of the Riverlands, following around an undead zombie. Just go for it. Go for it. To reveal nothing. To fucking reveal nothing. And then, oh my gosh, we got this huge secret that Barristan has. It's going to be a big bomb. And he reveals it and it's nothing. It's very odd that George clearly thinks something's very important about Starfall, and then he just keeps kicking the can down the road on what it is. Or maybe he can't come up with what it should be. But there's my I don't know, little thing about House Dayne is that George really wants it to be important. He does. He wants it to be revolutionary. And he keeps reminding us about it, but he won't pull the trigger. He won't pull the trigger on actually revealing or having any information that'll shift and change the plot and affect things. Cersei was fairly confident that Ned took a baby from Ashara. Does Barristan draw some connection between her and Dany? Ned was unwilling to harm her. So this gets into the R+L = D baby swap like idea. In a Game of Thrones, Ned is much more concerned with Dany than he ever fucking is about Jon. Jon, he thinks about Jon a little bit, but he thinks about Dany a fuckload more. And he has his dream about the Tower of Joy and immediately wakes up and wants to do stuff about Dany. You know, like Dany is the reason, is what he's thinking about before he goes into his little coma, his opium induced coma. And then she's the first thing when he comes out. You know, he has very little interest in like running to the wall and dealing with Jon and telling him anything. Like it's just, and so you can kind of say, okay, well, this is all about Dany. Ned is obsessed with Dany because that's what the text says. Now, I would say that like all the R+L J people would be like, Dany is a metaphorical stand-in for Jon because it's a Targ baby. It's just like he's protecting Dany because he should have been protecting Jon, and he's just thinking about Dany the whole time. I mean, he's just thinking about Jon the whole time when he thinks about Dany. That Dany is the shell, you know. And sure. So, you know, I don't know. It is of course it's a remarkable coincidence though, right? That I mean, I guess there's coincidences in these stories that Barristan would be in love with Ashara Dayne and then go across the world and find Daenerys and be like, oh fuck, you look a lot like Ashara Dayne, coincidentally. you happen to be her secret daughter. If you know, from a Barristan perspective, that's just a remarkable fucking coincidence. But you know, I don't know if Barristan makes the connection that Cersei does. People rarely bring up the Cersei thing because it's hard to make sense of it all. Let me bring it up real quick here. Oh am I gonna get the right one? Is this it? No, that's not it. See, it's like too many of these things open. Honor, she spat. How dare you play noble lord with me? What do you take me for? You've a bastard of your own. I've seen him. Who was the mother, I wonder? Some Dornish peasant you raped while her holdfast burned? So this is like the idea that there was war in Dorne, retconned away. A whore, or at the grieving sister, the Lady Ashara. She threw herself into the sea, I'm told. Why was that? For the brother you slew or the child you stole? Tell me, my honorable Lord Eddard, how are you any different from Robert or me or Jamie? You know, he's like, for a start, I do not kill children. I kill people that were really scared from seeing ice zombies and without properly interrogating them. Yeah, but I don't know. Barristan doesn't make any connections. Doesn't think about Cersei here. But it's like, or are you talking about the baby? I don't know. I wish any of the Dane stuff made sense. So it's either stillborn or stolen. Right. That's the thing. I mean, no, so now I'm getting it. So Barristan, if Cersei believes that the baby was stolen, And Barristan believes that it was stillborn. You still have a disappearing baby. Yeah, and so it's strange. Yeah, it's very strange that Barristan would not think about Jon Snow. Like if Cersei's heard about Jon Snow and thinks like, oh wait, was that baby? That was the baby that like took off. That was brought north. Like, how do you reconcile the fact that like Cersei has this idea of has heard a rumor about a stolen baby, and Barristan has heard a rumor about a stillborn baby, and they haven't heard each other's rumors as far as we know. I mean, it's possible that Cersei heard the other rumor and that she's just bringing up the negative one in order to dunk on Ned. But it's weird that like Barristan wouldn't hear about the stolen one.